Olá, tudo bem? Aqui é o Brian Mir e hoje eu vou lançar uma nova parceria entre Brasil 247 e uma emissora de notícias independente dos Estados Unidos chamada The Real News. The Real News não recebe dinheiro de propaganda de corporações e também não recebe dinheiro das fundações como a Fundação Soros, que financia algumas operações midiáticas no mundo inteiro. E apesar de ser neoliberal, é acusado pela direita de ser comunista, que é risável. The Real News é sediado em Baltimore e eles fazem um monte de reportagens interessantes, alguns que são bastante relevantes à conjuntura brasileira. Então é com muito orgulho que hoje eu vou apresentar 4 do que eu achei eram as melhores entrevistas que apareceu no The Real News durante a semana passada.
Your viewers won't be shocked to hear this, Tucker, but the news media, the fake news media, are lying about the situation in Venezuela. Let me put it for you this way. Imagine if Hillary Clinton had refused to admit defeat after losing to President Trump in 2016 and banded together a group of 24 U.S. soldiers and attempted to take the White House by force. I don't think she'd be walking freely on the streets the way Juan Guaido is walking right now in Caracas, and I certainly think the news media would be calling it rightfully a coup.
And that was Gray Zone's journalist, Anya Parampil, on Fox News with Tucker Carlson. Anya Parampil, along with several others of the Embassy Protection Collective, are inside the Venezuelan embassy in Washington, D.C. since April 10th to protect the embassy from being taken over by the Venezuelan opposition, that is the Juan Guaido and group. Now, the Venezuelan opposition, along with the United States, are trying to install the Juan Guaido representatives at the embassy, but Anya and the collective are trying to prevent them from doing so. Now, the collective includes Code Pink, Popular Resistance, and Answer Coalition, I believe, and there might be others, but Anya will tell us more about that. Good to have you, Anya.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Sharmini. It's great to be with you.
All right, Anya, the obvious question is, what are you doing there inside the embassy, and what are you hoping to achieve?
I've been coming in and out of the embassy since this began on April 10th. And I've been outside as well as on the inside covering the demonstrations by the opposition, which kind of picked up last week after that attempted military takeover. I don't know if you really call it that, considering there were only 70 soldiers, many of them which were lied to in Venezuela to try and take over Miraflores Palace. But since that date, last Wednesday, I guess a week ago now, I've been stuck inside of the embassy because opposition thugs essentially have set up tents and blocked all of the entrances to the Maduro government's embassy here, hoping to prevent more people from coming inside. But most importantly, they're trying to block food and other necessary supplies from coming inside of this building so that the collective can continue to fuel itself. It's ironic, I say, because the opposition, which are acting on behalf of Carlos Vecchio, Juan Guaido's shadow puppet ambassador here in Washington, D.C., which we assume is acting on behalf of the State Department, is employing the same tactic it uses against the Venezuelan people, a blockade and siege against U.S. citizens now inside of this embassy, hoping that it will hurt their resolve and encourage them to leave the building so that Vecchio and his cronies can sit inside. I'm actually speaking to you from the ambassador's office. This is the chair that Carlos Vecchio would like to occupy illegally. But so far, he's been unable to because the collective inside is not giving up. They're very strong, and they're actually having a really good time. There's a great diverse group of people. You mentioned the 3 organizations which have been leading this charge: Code Pink. We have Medea Benjamin, Ariel Gold outside. Inside we have Kevin Zeese and Margaret Flowers. from Popular Resistance, and outside we also have the Answer Coalition, Brian Becker and other members, as well as members from the Answer Coalition on the inside, and then just people from around the country, honestly, who have come to hold this embassy. What they say is they're here to protect international law, ensure the United States abides by the Vienna Conventions on Diplomatic Relations, and protects this property, which is owned by the Venezuelan government, the Maduro government, because according to Article 2 of the Vienna Convention, this building is inviolable. U.S. officers and officials cannot enter it without authorization from the owner. And the people inside here are staying at the invitation of the Maduro government. So they have the legal cover to continue to sit here, to sleep here, to stay inside. And so the strategy from the opposition has been a war of attrition, as I mentioned, trying to prevent supplies from getting inside, hoping again that it will cause people to give up. And I can tell you from speaking to the individuals leading the collective, I don't think that's likely to happen anytime.
It's the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Perez coming to you from Baltimore. Last week, when Venezuela's opposition leader, Juan Guaido, tried to call on the Venezuelan military to abandon President Maduro in what many called a coup attempt, the Trump administration accused Russia of helping Maduro thwart the plan. Then, last Friday, President Trump had an extensive phone call with Russia's President Vladimir Putin, where they discussed Venezuela, among several other issues. Meanwhile, Venezuela's foreign minister, Jorge Arreaza, visited Moscow to meet with Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov. Following the meeting, Lavrov said very clearly that U.S. sanctions on Venezuela violate international law and are aimed at toppling the legitimate government of Venezuela. Finally, on the sidelines of an international meeting in Helsinki, Finland on Monday to discuss an agreement on how to deal with the climate change crisis in the Arctic, Lavrov met with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to address the issue of Venezuela. Joining me now to take a closer look at U.S.-Russia relations over Venezuela is Colonel Larry Wilkerson. He is the former Chief of Staff to Secretary of State Colin Powell. Now he's a distinguished adjunct professor of government and public policy at the College of William and Mary. Thanks for joining us, Larry.
Good to hear your voice, Sharmini.
All right, Larry, you had a very interesting meeting last week, and that was with the Foreign Minister of Venezuela, Jorge Arreaza. Now, I know Arreaza had also met with the Foreign Minister Lavrov, the Foreign Minister of Russia. And I am sure, given the current situation in Venezuela, you discussed the escalating situation that Venezuela is facing. And I know in the past you've had quite a bit of experience with the Venezuelan military. So give us a sense of your takeaways from that meeting with Jorge Arreaza.
Sharmini, their foreign minister, as you well know, I think you've met with him, is a young man who is very impressive. He is on top of his brief. He's on top of Venezuela's history and its remarkable devotion to democracy over the years. Its military's more or less support of, always, the Constitution. One of the things that's troubled me so much about Elliott Abrams and Mike Pompeo and John Bolton and the administration's approach to Venezuela is how they treat them as if they were Panama or they were Honduras. They are not. I've worked with the Venezuelan military. They're very professional. I would place them at the top of the list for South America. That puts them above Argentina, above Chile, whose militaries are quite competent too. And I would say that Mr. Trump ought to be very, very careful about saying he's going to send Marines or soldiers to Venezuela, because the Venezuelan military will be unified immediately. It will take to the hills and it will fight us as the Vietnamese did during the Vietnam War and as the Taliban are in Afghanistan right now, to the last Marine, to the last soldier. and we'll be going home, and we will not be very successful there. So I hope that's what Vladimir Putin talked about with Trump. Putin's a smart man, probably told Trump, you don't want to get involved in those jungles. You don't want to get involved in those mountains. You don't want to get involved with that military. Nothing could solidify them around a president, around the Constitution, around their country and the defense thereof, more than a gringo invasion. It's that simple. So invading Venezuela under whatever pretext would be terrible. And let me just say something about the incompetence of Gina Haspel and the CIA. Now, I know about the incompetence of the CIA. I've been up close and personal with it for over half a century. This was probably the most incompetent bunch of people trying to pull off a coup against Nicolas Maduro in Caracas that I've ever seen. In the last week, they have demonstrated that they can walk into the White House and tell the president everything is fine. Juan Guaido will be the winner. Leopoldo Lopez will be the winner. Everything is going to be fine. We are now positioned to pull off the coup and put Guaido in the leadership role he should be in, so blah, 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 blah. And it completely failed. It completely collapsed. I'd have fired Gina Haspel. I'd have fired half the CIA. And I probably would have taken some action against some other people, too, including the National Security Advisor, maybe Elliot Abrams, maybe some others. And I'd have certainly backed off some of the people who are leading my policy with respect to Latin America right now, like Rick Scott and Marco Rubio. This was a display of American incompetence in its own hemisphere, unparalleled.
Now, that's really interesting, Larry, that Putin and Trump spoke with each other, and Venezuela was one of the key issues. Do you think the conversation actually diffused tensions that exist between Venezuela and the United States, and now Russia getting involved? Or do you think this might have escalated the tensions?
Well, you have President Trump actually contradicting Secretary of State Pompeo and his National Security Advisor, and that's good. Anytime he contradicts them, that's good. I think Putin probably gave him some advice. Putin is probably one of the, no matter how draconian, mafioso-like, or whatever we may think he is, he's probably one of the most strategically oriented, strategic thinking leaders in the world. And if he got Trump aside and he said something like I just said to you, you don't want to do this. This would be very stupid. You'll solidify the military. They'll be opposed to you and you alone. Won't matter who's the president down here because they'll just be taking you on. And Trump listened to him. I think Trump seems to have, for whatever reason, great respect for Vladimir Putin. And as far as I'm concerned, more power to him, because if Putin gave him advice like that, it was very sound and very good advice.
All right, Larry, I will let you get back to your garden, and looking forward to talking with you next week. Thanks a lot.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
And thank you for joining us here on the Real News Network.
It's the Real News Network, and I'm Greg Wilpert in Baltimore. President Donald Trump is a fearmonger, and he uses this fearmongering to develop an increasingly authoritarian government that victimizes minorities and helps him and other members of the U.S. elite to consolidate their power. This is, in a nutshell, the starting thesis of a new book by Charles Derber and Yael Magras titled Moving Beyond Fear, Upending the Security Details in Capitalism, Fascism, and Democracy. Joining me now to discuss this book is one of the co-authors, Charles Derber. He is professor of sociology at Boston College and author of 21 other books, including one that I discussed with him last year called Welcome to the Revolution. Thanks, Charles, for joining me again.
Thanks for having me again, Greg. Nice to see you.
So let's start with the beginning of your argument that Trump tries to stoke fear. People who are critical of Trump generally have the sense about his approach towards immigration already. But where else does he do this, and what purpose does this fear-mongering serve?
So I just want to say it's not just Trump. I mean, the United States has been both liberal and conservative presidents have used fear as a primary way to sort of maintain the legitimacy of the existing order. It becomes particularly important when the economy runs into extreme, when masses of people are undergoing economic distress, as the level of wealth and income inequality grows. the whole dominant narrative of meritocracy that tends to be a legitimating idea in America, that, this difference between the rich and the poor reflects natural differences in hard work and merit. But when the differences become extreme, that narrative loses credibility. People work very hard and they're still not moving up. And then the security narrative, the elites use the security narrative to sort of cement their hold on the people who are losing ground economically by bringing them together and saying we have to come together in our sort of nationalist fervor to ward off threats to the United States as a country. It should be said that the threats are not only manufactured abroad, that is, they're foreign enemies that are stoked, but they're also domestic. In the case of Trump, the domestic enemies will usually include people of color, liberals of a variety of kind, leftists, socialists, you'll hear more and more about, AOC and Bernie Sanders style socialism, Black Lives Matter. The overall thrust is to make people feel that they depend on elites for safety and that nothing is more important than security and that only the existing elites are capable of delivering that. And I think that is Trump's primary way he uses fear because people are already scared of their economic situation, of the social, the violence in the country and so forth. And so he can stoke this violence very effectively to develop what I call the security narrative, which is very dominant right now.
Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Mark Steiner. Great to have you all with us. So here we go. Congress wants Trump's tax returns. House Ways and Means Committee Chairman Richard E. Neal requested them all, or 6 specific things, but then Trump's Secretary of the Treasury, Steven Mnuchin, sent this letter in response, basically saying no deal. Yeah, not going to give that from the IRS. IRS, of course, now being run by Charles Reddick, who is one of the nation's leading attorneys for people, some people might call tax cheats, will not turn over Trump's tax returns, writing that the committee's request is unprecedented, it's constitutionally questionable, and may have lasting negative effects for taxpayers countrywide. Yet, the 1924 Anti-Corruption Act says that Congress can ask for anyone's tax returns at any time. Now, this may go immediately to the Supreme Court or wind its way up to the Supreme Court. We don't know what that means. So what gives here? Well, our guest, who has been a financial regulator and is a professor of economics and law at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, should know something about all this and can shed some light. Of course, we're talking about Bill Black, and good to have you with us, Bill. Welcome back.
Thank you.
I should also say the title of his book, because I love the title of this book, The Best Way to Rob a Bank is to Own One. That is one of the best titles in American history, I think. So let me just start with this. So both the chairman of the committee, in trying to get some tax returns from Trump, and Secretary Mnuchin talk about Section 6103, both using that as a defense why they should get the tax returns legally, and the secretary saying, no, you shouldn't have these tax returns because this is politicized and you don't have a legitimate reason. So what is this Section 6103 and what does it mean?
Well, it means the Democrats win, is the short answer. I was also litigation director of a major federal agency, and I'm a law prof as well. So what it says in the statute is while it isn't all of Congress that can request, it's the key committee chairs in the House and the Senate. This is the appropriate one in the House. So this is one of the consequences of the Democrats getting control of the House, that they're now in a position to make this request. And while the word I'm using is request, the statute is mandatory. It's not discretionary. It says when you receive this request, you shall provide those documents to the committee chair. So the Democrats have a clean winner. What's the origins of the statute? The origins of the statute are in the Teapot Dome scandal. And in history, there used to be a debate about the most corrupt administration in the United States, whether it was the Grant administration or the Harding administration.
Right.
The Harding administration is what brought us the Teapot Dome scandal. Teapot Dome was petroleum reserves. These were insider sales to situations where the Secretary of the Interior, the guy granting the oil leases and gas leases, was secretly on the payroll getting kickbacks. So it's just blatant corruption. And he was the first sitting cabinet level secretary of an agency to go to prison, for which he richly deserved. Okay, so there's no debate anymore.
And Mellon, by the way, just a digression, but and Andrew Mellon, the financier and financial tycoon of the day, was Secretary of the Treasury. You should add that as well, right?
Yeah, it was, again, another gang of thieves. Anyway, that used to be the historical debate. Who was most corrupt? Harding, Trump. I'm sorry, Harding, Grant, and obviously the answer is Trump. Is the most corrupt and has his own cabinet, a band of thieves. Okay, so they desperately, of course, don't want to give up these tax returns, just as Trump has desperately not wanted to give up the tax returns, because the tax returns are every investigator's, financial investigator's greatest joy in life. They would reveal a ton of information that Trump is desperate to avoid criminal investigators having. And while we had assumed that the Mueller investigation really dug into his taxes, the indications now are probably that actually didn't occur. So you can see why Trump would be particularly worried about it. Now, here's the real kicker.
Okay.
Mnuchin says that he's refusing on the basis of legal advice from the Department of Justice.
I was going to ask you about that. Yes, right. I mean, please explain that to us.
So, we already knew the Department of Justice under Barr was not representing the United States of America anymore. It's representing the Donald Trump against the people of the United States. But second, he's going to have to really do violence to the law. And he's going to have to do violence to the law in a way that really can come back and bite the Department of Justice in a bunch of different cases, right? Because he's going to have to, there are all kinds of statutes we use in the federal government. I was a Department of Justice lawyer as well.
Right.
And we say, hey, when it says shall, it really means shall. And the following thing must happen, and you didn't do it, and therefore you have the following consequences. Now the Department of Justice is going to have to say shall only sometimes mean shall.
Well, I'm curious what you think. What could the Justice Department have told him? I mean, what could, if you were on the other side of this, what possibly could be the advice they gave him about why they could fight this legally?
Oh, I don't think they did give him advice.
You think they made it all up?
No, yeah, this is a sham, right? And what they're going to therefore do, I predict, is say, we need to look beyond what the House of Representatives, in particular the committee chair, says they're doing, and divine what we think they're really doing.
Is that a legal term?
Yes, entrails, right? And they're going to burn these entrails, and they're going to say, we think they're really perfidious Democrats, and that they're really on a partisan witch hunt. And anytime we think they're on a perfidious witch hunt, we just say no, right? So it brings motive in where it is not brought in the law. And if you bring motive in, then all those nasty things that random members of the legislature say, like their racist rants and such,
right?
Well, then their statutes could be struck down as having racial animus. Usually that racist rant by a particular member is disregarded in judicial review. And indeed, that was critical to Trump winning in the Supreme Court, given all his racist statements. about Muslims, right? The Supreme Court is saying, nah, and there they had an enormous record as to what was really going on and said, no, you can't look into the minds and motives of people. Justice Department is about to say, yes, you can. And you can say, I don't think they're good motives, and therefore the actions are unlawful, and I won't comply. And that's really super dangerous to the United States government once it's put back under honest leadership.
So in the letter that Steve Mnuchin, he writes, as you have recognized, the committee's request is unprecedented. It presents serious constitutional questions, the resolutions of which may have lasting consequences for all taxpayers, and say they consulted the Department of Justice, and that the committee's statutory authority under Section 6103F is bounded by Congress's authority. Under the Constitution, the Supreme Court has held the Constitution requires that congressional information demands must reasonably serve a legitimate legislative purpose. So that's what he writes in his letter, correct?
Only the last quoted sentence from the Supreme Court is not a lie.
But I don't understand. All right, as Joe average citizen reads this letter, it seems reasonable. People believe, you know what I'm saying? I mean, people say it's government overreach. So I'm curious how you think this could, what could be the arguments if they get before the Supreme Court that could allow even the conservative justices of the Supreme Court to go along with the administration?
Okay, so it has to actually be, flipped around. Because
please.
There's no reasonable argument that you can make in good faith on these facts. So, is Congress's power unlimited? No, right? So Congress has to do things that are at least related to congressional function. Have the Democrats cited legitimate congressional functions in their request? Yes. Would they win under existing precedent 100% of the time? So for Trump to win in front of the Supreme Court even requires A, that Trump and Barr ignore the law and reverse it, and then that the Supreme Court junk law and say, yes, we too are now, Trump uberalist types, and we will read anything into the Constitution necessary for Trump to win. And if that's it, then, it's basically game over on this phase of American democracy.